Just a couple quick things also before I get going. I want to just make a plug right now for our small groups again. Last week, small groups started, and I know there was a little bit less of a break in between small groups, but I would just encourage you to get involved in a small group, get plugged in. We've got some great ones going on. We have a new one with parents. We got a parenting small group happening on called the Art of Parenting with Brandon and Lacey, and I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that lead. If you have that group, if you have any kids, I don't think it's just little kids. It's any kids. If you have kids and you are wanting to talk about parenting, I would just encourage you to come to that group. If you don't have kids, then I'll make a plug for mine. You can come to my group and hang out with me. We just go deeper into the sermon every single Wednesday, 6:00. It's a place for you to be able to ask questions and go deeper with me. And so I would just encourage you to come. With that being said, today we are going to start a brand new series called The Way of Jesus, the everyday life of a disciple. We're going to be talking about what following Jesus actually looks like, right? We're going to talk about something that sounds really simple, following Jesus, and it's important, but in practice it is not very simple, is it? Following Jesus doesn't feel very simple most of the time, and I think a lot of people, whether consciously or subconsciously, right, we kind of boil down faith to a moment, especially around Easter time, right? We said a prayer, we made a decision, we said this thing, and maybe there was a moment where I responded and said yes to Jesus. And don't get me wrong, those moments, they matter a lot, but Jesus never invited people into a moment. Jesus always invites people into a way of life. Right? Jesus' call is not believe in me. Jesus' call was follow me, come with me, right? And that's what this series is all about. It's not just about what we believe, it's about how we live, right? Because following Jesus isn't just something that we do on Sundays. It's not just something that we agree with cognitively or mentally. Following Jesus is something that shapes our identity, and it shapes our decisions, it shapes our relationships, it shapes our priorities. Following Jesus shapes our everyday life. So over the next 6 weeks, we're going to talk about what that life actually looks like. We'll look about the invitation to follow Jesus and the new identity that he gives us, the new direction that he puts us in, the new rhythms of life that sustain us as we follow him, the community that we're called to do that with, and the mission that we are sent on together. And whether you are brand new to the faith, maybe you just accepted Christ last week on Easter, or maybe you've been following Jesus for years, I promise you this series is for you, because every single one of us has a next step. Now, one of us has arrived. All of us have a next step. But before any of that happens, before the identity, before the direction, before the rhythms, it all starts in the same place, and it starts with an invitation. So this morning, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 4. If you want to turn there with me, Matthew chapter 4 is where Jesus starts his ministry. And one of the very first things that Jesus does in his ministry is invite ordinary people to follow him. Right? And it starts with that. I think what we'll see today is that following Jesus doesn't begin with having everything together. It just begins with a response, right? And so join me, Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 18. As always, there's Bibles around you if you need one, and if you don't own one, please take that home with you. If you need some help, it's going to be on page 458. But here's what we read today in Matthew chapter 4, 18 to 25. It says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once, they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news about the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. So, as you read this, one of the very first things that you notice is how simple and how really intentional this moment is with Jesus and these guys. Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee. He sees Simon, he sees Andrew, and they are doing what they have always done. They're fishing. Right? They aren't searching for him. They're not asking questions. They're not trying to figure out their spiritual lives. Right? They're just working. They're in the middle of an ordinary day, an ordinary moment, and up to that point, it's been probably just a normal day for them. And Jesus walks up to them and he says, "Follow me." Right, and right away, I think we see something about the way that Jesus calls people. We're going to see a few things this morning about the way that Jesus calls you. Here's the first thing. When Jesus calls you, he comes to you. When Jesus calls you, he comes to you. Following Jesus does not start with you finding Jesus. It starts with him coming to you. I want you to think about this. In this passage, Jesus is the one who's moving. Jesus sees them. Jesus is the one who speaks first, right? These fishermen are not on a spiritual journey to track down the Messiah, right? They're not in the synagogues talking about deep theological ideas. Where are they? They're at work. They're in the middle of an ordinary day, an everyday life, and that's where Jesus meets them. I think a lot of us have this idea that if we're going to follow Jesus, we got to go find him. We need to understand more. We need to figure things out. We need to get to a better place spiritually. And maybe then, I'll take a step toward Jesus. But that's actually not what we see here at all. Right? What we see here is Jesus stepping into ordinary lives and extending an invitation before anything has changed. Right? Jesus does not wait for them to be ready. He calls them as they are. Right? He doesn't wait for them to be qualified. Right? He invites them even from their current reality. And the same thing is true for us. Right? Following Jesus doesn't begin when we finally feel ready. It begins when you recognize that Jesus has already come to you, that he sees you right where you are, in the middle of your life and in the middle of your routine and your questions and your struggles, and he invites you to follow him. Right? You don't start following Jesus by finding Jesus. You start following when you realize he's already found you. Right? Even in that moment, though, there's something else happening, right? Just because Jesus doesn't just come to them, he says something to them, and what he says is surprisingly simple. He doesn't sit down and explain everything. He doesn't give them a full picture of what they're about to buy into or get into. He doesn't walk them through all the details or answer all their questions. He just says these two words, "Follow me." And that, I think, also is important when we think about the way that Jesus calls people. Right? Because here's another truth. When Jesus calls, he invites you before he explains anything. The chuckles mean that I know some of you know that truth already. He invites you before he explains anything. Jesus invites you into a relationship with him before giving you full clarity. Put yourselves in the shoes of these soon-to-be disciples for a second. This is kind of wild. These guys are fishermen. They're fishing. They have jobs, responsibilities, routines, and families. And a man they've never followed before walks up to them, and in verse 19, he says, "Come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people." That's it. There's no timeline, there's no details, there's no breakdown of what that actually means. There's no explanation of where they're going or what they will be doing or how this is going to play out. There's just an invitation. And I don't know about you, I don't like to operate that way. I like clarity before I take a step. I want clarity before commitment. I want answers before I'm going to choose to obey, right? I want to know where this is going before I say yes. But Jesus doesn't work that way. He doesn't give them any details, and they're not going to get any details. All they're going to get is Jesus. And that's enough. And I think that's where a lot of us get stuck when it comes to following Jesus. We start asking questions. What does this mean for my life? What am I gonna have to give up? Where is this going to lead? And those aren't bad questions. They just can't be the first question, right? Because Jesus doesn't answer all of that up front. Instead, he invites us to take a step of trust before we have that full clarity. He just says, follow me. And the reality is you can't follow Jesus from a distance. At some point, it requires movement and it requires trust. It requires a willingness to step into something before you have every detail figured out. Right? That's what makes this an invitation and not a contract. It's an invitation to follow. Jesus isn't saying, here's everything laid out in front of you. Now decide if you're going to follow. He just says, trust me enough to take the next step, and I'll meet you there. You don't follow Jesus because you understand everything. You follow Jesus because you trust who he is. And for these first disciples, that trust wasn't just theoretical, right? This wasn't just something they felt, it was something they acted on, because the next thing that we read in this passage is not a discussion, it's a decision, right? Verse 20, at once they left their nets and followed him. Right? That phrase, at once, it means exactly what it says, right? Immediately, right away. They left their nets and they followed. There's no delay, no negotiation, no, hey, can you give me like 5 minutes to talk this through? Like, it was just right now. They left and they followed. And I think honestly, that shows us the next thing, that when Jesus calls, it requires leaving something behind. When Jesus calls, it requires leaving something behind. You cannot follow Jesus without letting go of something. Right? When Jesus says, follow me, he's not inviting them to add him onto their already busy, ordinary life. He's inviting them to reorder their lives around him. For these guys, these fishermen, it meant leaving their nets. And that might sound like just a small detail, they just leave their nets and they follow. But this was their livelihood. This was their income. This was their stability and their identity. It's how they provided for themselves and their family. It's how they understood their place in the world. They were fishermen. That's who they were. And for James and John, later on, it goes even further, right? You get to verse 2 of 22, and James and John, when they get this invitation, it says, immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Now that word immediately, it means immediately. Right then, they left. And they didn't just leave their nets, they left their father in the boat. He's there. He's gonna continue doing the work that they're also doing. All right, this wasn't just a job for them, this was a family business. And some of you know what that means. Right, there's expectations, there's legacy, there's security, and when Jesus calls them, they walk away from all of it. And now it's important to say this. This does not mean that following Jesus always requires you to physically leave your job. This is like the small print at the bottom of it's like the read very fast at the end of the commercial, this doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna have to leave your job and do all this kind of stuff, right? But it might. It does mean this, though. Nothing gets to stay in first place anymore. Right? Because following Jesus isn't about adding Jesus to an already full life. It's about giving him the center of your life. And I think this is where this tension gets a little more real for us this morning, because a lot of us really love the idea of following Jesus until it costs us something. We love to talk about grace. We love to talk about forgiveness, and we love to talk about this invitation. We love the idea that Jesus meets us where we are. But when following Jesus starts to mean letting go of control, or surrendering our plans, or releasing something that we've been holding on to, or walking away from something we know isn't aligned with Jesus, this is where it gets difficult. So here's a question for you today. Where are your nets? Where are your nets? What are the things in your life that give you a sense of security? What are the things that define your identity? What are the things that feel too important to let go of? For some of us, it's control, right? For others, maybe comfort. For others, it's a habit or a sin that we've been holding on to. For others, maybe it's a plan that we've already decided we don't want God to interrupt. But I want you to hear this. Jesus is not just trying to take something from you just to take it. He's not trying to make your life smaller. Jesus is inviting you into something better. But you can't follow Jesus and stay where you are at the same time. Right? You can't step into what Jesus has for you if you're still holding on to what he's asking you to release. These disciples didn't have all the answers. They didn't know where the road would lead. Right? But they knew enough about Jesus in that moment to trust him, and so they followed. Following Jesus will cost you something, but it will never cost you more than he is worth. I want you to go back with me to our Philippians series. All right, in Philippians, Paul is talking about all the things that he had accomplished. And he says, all of that means nothing compared to what? The surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus. That's it. It's the surpassing worth. And this is where a lot of people hesitate, because when we hear that following Jesus means surrender or means letting go of something, the question underneath all of that starts to be, okay, but what happens to me? Where is he going to send me? If I give that up, what do I actually get? Right? And Jesus actually answers that question in the same sentence, right? He doesn't leave it at follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. That's verse 19 again. And I'll be honest, I really don't like the NIV translation there. I will send you out to fish for people. It's a little bit quirky. I'll send you isn't even the best translation, because it's not really what he's saying there. The better translation is I will make you fishers of men. I will make you fish for people. But that word make is not like a forceful make. It's not like, hey, follow me and I'll force you to go fish for people. It is a follow me and I'll prepare you and equip you to go and do this. That's what that word is. Right? And here's the thing. When Jesus calls you, he changes you. When Jesus calls you, he changes you. Following Jesus is not just about what you can become, it's what he'll make you. Right? And notice the order here. Jesus doesn't say, fix yourself and come follow me. He doesn't say, get your life together and then I'll use you. Right? Become something and then come with me. It's follow me and then I will make you fishers of men. I will make you fish for people, right? It means that the responsibility, hear this, for transformation does not fall on you. It is all on God. And that's different than a lot of us have been taught, right? A lot of us have been taught that following Jesus is basically just about trying harder to be better. So we think, I need to be more disciplined. I need to fix this part of my life. I need to clean up my life. I need to become the kind of person that God would want to use in the circumstance. I need to be better. But that's not discipleship. That is self-improvement. Right? Discipleship is different. Discipleship is walking with Jesus and in the meantime, letting him cover over all of that and transform you in real time. That's what discipleship is all about. And that word, I will make you, that's a process. That's intentional. That's personal. These guys had no idea what they were stepping into. These guys had no idea that they would be the ones preaching to the crowds. They had no idea that they would lead the early church. They had no idea that they would be the ones to carry on the message of Jesus into the world. All they knew was this: Jesus just called me to follow, and I'm going to go. I choose to follow. And over time, he made them into something completely new. And the same is true for you. Right? You might feel like you're not ready. You might feel like you don't know enough, or like you don't have it all together. You might feel like you're not the type of person that God would use. But honestly, though, that's kind of the point. Right? Jesus doesn't call the finished version of you. He calls you where you are right now. And then as you follow him, he makes you new. Right? Jesus calls you right where you are, but he refuses to leave you there. All right, this is I think why this is important for this series, because following Jesus is not just about trying harder to live a better life. It is learning to walk with him in a way that actually changes you from the inside out. I want you to think about this. If Jesus comes to you and if he invites you before you understand anything, if following Jesus means that you need to let go of something, but he also promises that he will make you, then the question stops being, do I have everything figured out? And it starts being this: do I trust him enough to follow? Do I trust him enough to follow? The same Jesus who calls you is the same Jesus who will carry you and who will change you. And that's not just a question for someday. That's not one that I just hope you'll wrestle with one of these days. I want to wrestle with that right now in this moment. Right? Because for some of us, Jesus is calling us to follow him for the very first time. Right? Maybe for others, you've said yes, but if you're honest, you've drifted a little bit. And then maybe you're around Jesus, but you're not really following him. And for some of us, we're following, but you already know what your nets are that you need to drop. And you know exactly what he's asking you to release, and you've just been holding on to it. So I want to just slow down for a moment and just give us some ways to respond today. And here's what they are. I don't think they're complicated, but I want you to pray about which one God would ask of you today. Here's the first thing. For some of you, your response is to say yes to Jesus for the first time. I don't know who that is in this room, but there's maybe somebody. Here's the thing. It's not about waiting until you're ready. It's not about figuring it all out. It's right now, in this moment, responding to the invitation of God to follow him. So maybe for someone that's responding for the first time, for some of you, the response this morning is just to take a moment and come back. Right? You've drifted. You've been doing your own thing. You've been around Jesus, but not following Jesus. And the response this morning is just simply, Jesus, I'm following you again. I choose to follow you right now. For some, you already know that there's something in your life, your nets, that Jesus has been asking you to let go of. Maybe it's control or a habit or a relationship or a plan. And your step today is simply, Jesus, I trust you enough to let this go. Here's the thing. Every single one of those responses comes from the same place. It's a place of trust. Right? It's, again, not having all the answers. Not having to have everything all figured out. It's just saying, Jesus, I trust you enough to take this next step. So as we sing this last song together, I don't want this to just be a song. I want this to be a response. This is your moment to say, Jesus, I'm following you. This is your moment to just be able to sit in prayer with Jesus and to be able to say, God, I want to follow you. Whether for the first time or the second time or the 1,000th time, God, I apologize if I've been around you but not following, but today I make the decision to follow you. Right, and you can stay seated and pray. You can stand and worship. The altars are always open, maybe this side more than that side today since the baptism is blocking it. But however you want to respond, that's up to you. But as we sing and as we have this moment, I would just ask you to spend a moment in prayer and respond as we sing. Let's pray. God, we love you. And this morning, God, we come and we hear specifically these two words in Matthew chapter 4 that you said to Simon and Andrew and to James and to John, follow me. God, I pray that we would hear that invitation today. That whether for the first time or not the first time or however we are, God, we would just respond to that call to follow you. And God, as we do that, would you just show us what the nets are that we need to drop? What do we need to leave behind to more fully follow you? God, and as we do that, we just pray that you would bless that decision, that you would seal that decision, that we would live for you from this day forward. God, we love you in Jesus' name. Amen.